What is self, and why does it matter? Who are you? You might answer by saying your name, but who really are you? How do you know you are a cat or a human? What is a human anyway? Is there a way to tell that you are yourself and not another person? Although you do not need to know the answers to these questions in order to live your life, you may find them to be quite valuable if you wish to cultivate your personal growth. Personal development and growth require self-awareness, which can be seen both from a philosophical and psychological perspective. From a psychological perspective, self-awareness is crucial because it allows us to recognize and manage our own emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. It allows us to regulate our own behavior and to make better decisions based on our own needs and goals. In addition to developing more empathy and understanding for other people, self-awareness may also assist us in developing greater empathy and understanding for ourselves. From a philosophical perspective, self-awareness is crucial because it enables us to understand our place in the world, our values, and our beliefs. It allows us to recognize our strengths and weaknesses, and to evaluate our own moral and ethical standards. By gaining a deeper understanding of ourselves, we can develop a sense of our own identity and purpose, thereby leading a more fulfilling and meaningful life. Overall, self-awareness is vital for both personal and interpersonal growth. It enables us to live more authentically, make better decisions, and build stronger relationships with others. Without self-awareness, we may struggle to understand ourselves and our place in the world, which may cause feelings of confusion, disconnection, and dissatisfaction. For example, if we lack self-awareness, we may not be able to recognize our own emotions and how they affect our behavior, which can lead to misunderstandings in our relationships with others. How can one inspect themselves? You can look in the mirror and see your face, but it won't display character status like in a game. It is possible for humans to examine themselves in a number of ways, including introspection. This involves looking inward and examining one's own thoughts, feelings, and mental states. It is a subjective method of self-inspection, and it involves being aware of one's own mental processes and sensations. Self-reflection. This involves analyzing one's own behavior, experiences, and beliefs. It involves looking back on one's past actions and experiences and considering how they have influenced one's present behavior and attitudes. Self-evaluation. This involves assessing one's own performance or abilities in a particular area. It is often used in education and employment contexts to help individuals identify their strengths and weaknesses and set goals for improvement. Self-monitoring. This involves keeping track of one's own behavior or mental states over time. It can be used to identify patterns or trends in behavior, as well as to track progress towards a particular goal. Self-experimentation. This involves deliberately changing one's own behavior or mental states in order to observe the effects. It can be used to test hypotheses about the relationship between different factors and outcomes. Overall, these methods of self-inspection can help individuals gain a deeper understanding of themselves, their motivations, and their behavior. They can also be used to identify areas for personal growth and improvement. What do you mean by self, you ask? You are quite a challenger, aren't you? The concept of self is complex and has been studied extensively in philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience. At its core, self refers to an individual's sense of identity, which includes their beliefs, values, memories, and experiences that make them unique. It is the conscious, subjective experience of being aware of oneself as a separate entity with distinct characteristics. The idea of self has been debated by philosophers for centuries, with various theories attempting to explain its nature and origin. Some theories view self as a fundamental, innate aspect of human consciousness, while others see it as a product of social and cultural influences. In psychology, self is often studied in relation to personality, motivation, and behavior. Overall, the concept of self is fundamental to our understanding of human experience and identity, and it continues to be a subject of ongoing inquiry and debate in various fields of study. Self-consciousness and personal identity are related concepts that are frequently discussed in philosophy and psychology in relation to self. Personal identity refers to the continuity of an individual's unique characteristics, experiences, and memories over time. It is the idea that we remain the same person throughout our lives, even as our bodies and minds change. Self-consciousness, on the other hand, is the awareness of one's own mental states, including thoughts, emotions, and sensations. It is the ability to introspect and reflect on one's own mental life. Self-consciousness is a key aspect of personal identity, as it allows us to have a sense of continuity and connection to our past and future selves. In philosophy, the concept of personal identity has been the subject of much debate. The two main views are the psychological continuity theory and the bodily continuity theory. The psychological continuity theory asserts that personal identity is based on the continuity of psychological characteristics, such as memories, beliefs, and desires. The bodily continuity theory, on the other hand, argues that personal identity is based on the continuity of the physical body. In psychology, self-consciousness has been studied in various ways, including through introspection, self-report measures, and neuroimaging techniques. Self-consciousness has been found to play a role in various psychological processes, such as self-regulation, social cognition, and emotion regulation. Among the examples of personal identity problems that can be found in literature is the story of the Ship of Theseus. The Ship of Theseus is a classical thought experiment that has been traced back to ancient Greece. The story involves a famous ship that was preserved by the Athenians for hundreds of years. As the ship aged, its parts began to wear out and were replaced with new ones. Over time, all of the original parts were replaced, so the question arose, is it still the same ship? The paradox of the Ship of Theseus has been a popular topic of debate in philosophy for centuries, and it continues to be discussed and explored in modern times. The Ship of Theseus is a thought experiment that raises questions about the nature of identity, persistence, and change. The experiment involves a hypothetical scenario where the parts of a ship are gradually replaced over time until none of the original parts remain. The question then arises, is it still the same ship? The paradox arises because if the ship is considered the same after all parts have been replaced, then it seems that the identity of the ship is not tied to any of its original parts. On the other hand, if the ship is not considered the same, then it seems that there must be some essential part or parts that make it the same ship. But which parts are these? This paradox has implications for the concept of personal identity, as it raises the question of what makes a person the same person over time. Is it their physical body, their memories, their personality, or some other factor? Like the Ship of Theseus, the question of personal identity seems to suggest that there may not be a single answer and that different factors may be more or less important to different people or in different contexts. In general, personal identity and self-consciousness are important concepts for understanding how individuals experience and comprehend their self. Additionally, they have a variety of practical applications, including those in therapy, education, and personal development. In the context of our society and life, personal identity also raises important questions about how we assign blame and accountability for past actions. Joan is one thought experiment that can be used to examine the issue of personal identity and responsibility for a crime. In this scenario, John is a criminal who is arrested and convicted for a serious crime. However, shortly after being released from prison, he is involved in a serious accident that results in amnesia. When he wakes up in the hospital, he has no memory of his previous life or of the crime he committed. In the hospital, doctors mistakenly identify him as a woman and he is given hormone treatments and eventually undergoes gender reassignment surgery. As Joan, she begins a new life and starts to build new relationships and a new identity. However, several years later, she begins to have flashbacks of her past life as John and eventually learns of the crime she committed. The question then arises, should Joan be held responsible for the crime committed by John, given that she has no memory of it and has essentially become a different person? Some philosophers argue that Joan should not be held responsible for the crime committed by John, since her actions as Joan were not causally connected to the crime. Others might argue, however, that Joan still bears some responsibility for the crime, since her past actions as John were a part of her causal history and contributed to her becoming the person she is now. Additionally, some might argue that Joan has a moral obligation to make amends for the harm caused by John, even if she is not legally liable for the crime. Overall, the case of Joan illustrates the complex nature of personal identity and its relationship to ethical responsibility, and raises important questions about how we assign blame and accountability for actions committed in the past. Ultimately, the question of whether the individual should take responsibility for their crime is complex and may depend on a variety of factors, including the severity of the crime, the harm caused, and the individual's level of culpability. The Ideas About Self comprises a wide range of fascinating topics that are waiting for you to discover. I will leave it at that for today.